All right, time to check in on the Birds as they get ready for the Cleveland Browns. But they got a lot of guys sitting on the sidelines. And at what point does that matter? At what point does that start to kind of become a distraction? You know, John, we heard in the Hard Knocks show a couple of weeks ago when Todd Haley got into it with Hugh Jackson a little bit when he's saying, look, we're not good enough to have guys sitting out. We need these guys out there. We're too soft of a team. And Jackson said, I've been in your seats. I know you want them, but in my seat, I need them ready for week number 1. What's the fine line there? Are the Eagles on that line where they think they are good enough that their guys aren't really needed to practice or play right now?
Yeah, they're not on that line. They're past it. I mean, that's their belief. And, yeah, I think that was a very interesting back and forth between Hugh Jackson and Todd Haley. I think part of it is that Todd Haley wants to be in Hugh Jackson's seat, so he's kind of showing him up. But I talked about it a lot. That's the way the league is going in general, not just the Eagles, not just the Browns. That's kind of the feeling. And you have a lot of old-school coaches who were around prior to 2011, and you had the time to prepare. And I think it was a different world. And I think the key there was getting prepared. But now, because you're limited, the number of practices you can have, the number of padded practices, very few live sessions in practice. The Eagles had 2, for instance, 15 training camp practices, and that's 2 more than Chip Kelly ever had. And a lot of teams don't go live at all. So if you don't have the time to prepare properly anyway, I think the thought process is we might as well be as healthy as possible by week 1. And that's evidenced by the way the Eagles, forget about Carson Wentz and Brandon Graham, guys who are actually rehabbing, Alshon Jeffrey, they're rehabbing. But it's best evidenced by Jordan Peters and Darren Sproles. They're both completely healthy. They're both back, and they're both not playing. And Doug said it today. He's not going to play them. He knows they're veteran players. He knows what they are, and he's not going to risk it.
Yeah. Well, at this stage, let's kind of take a look at some of these guys and kind of get an update on them. Alshon Jeffrey, I mean, we haven't heard a lot about him at all. I mean, this is a guy who had rotator cuff surgery. It seems kind of a routine situation, but it keeps you out. I mean, has he done anything?
No, he's still on the PUP list, so he hasn't practiced at all. He has been on the field more recently, working out on a separate field, running, catching passes, had his helmet yesterday. That's the first time I had seen him with his helmet. So he is getting closer. And you remember, I mean, Alshon was one of those guys last year when he first hurt his shoulder very, very early in camp. And then he kind of went away, and you didn't see him. And that was the story of last year's camp. When is Alshon going to be back? When's he going to be out there? And the mentality was the same last year. It was about getting him as healthy as possible once he got injured, once he had a little tweak. To try to get him by week 1, it proved to be the right decision.
Yeah, there's a couple of guys, like Jason Peters, Darren Sproles. He said today, Doug that is, that no, they will not play in this game, which means they're not going to play at all in the preseason, I guess, which is somewhat normal for some of these guys. But that game against Atlanta is, it's kind of interesting about that. Like, how important is it to get that win early in the season against a team like Atlanta that – that might have been the difference in that playoff game last year. If that game's in Atlanta, who knows what happens? And a lot of these guys, their first game of the year and their first game in a couple of months is going to be that first game against Atlanta. Does Doug seem to be think that that's an issue?
Yeah, I mean, everybody wants to win every game in the NFL. That's what makes it a little bit different than the other sports because – there are only 16 games, and every one of them is very, very meaningful, and it is extremely important to get not only a first-round bye, but home field advantage. It just makes everything easier if you're going to be a playoff team. Wild card teams have won in the past. It can be done, but it's much more difficult. And you saw the Eagles' road to the Super Bowl. One reason they're the Super Bowl champions, one of the major reasons, is the fact that that road went through Lincoln Financial Field. It probably goes in a negative direction if Nick Foles has to play on the road. But they had built enough money in the bank where that wasn't a concern. So you have to win. You have to win a lot, and you have to win early. And we talked about it yesterday on the show, there's going to be some sloppiness. And hopefully the talent overcomes the sloppiness.
You know, one of the things you look at here, Nick Foles, I guess, sat down with John Clark, and one of the things he said, you know, a lot of teams say they're close and that they have this family-like atmosphere, but it's not true. 2017 Philadelphia Eagles, we did have that. And I had said, you know, the 1979 Pittsburgh Pirates, the We Are Family Pirates, that lasted 1 year. Can you realistically think that this team is going to have that same that kindred spirit, that gelling that Foles said existed last year?
Well, they do get along. I mean, and the core group is still here. So I think that is an underrated part of it, the fact that they do.
Which I agree. I agree with that.
Other. And the leaders of this team, whether it's Carson or Malcolm Jenkins or Lane Johnson, Jason Peters, Chris Maragos on special teams, they're all still here. So I don't think that part of it is going to change. Whether I don't know if that's going to alone make you a great team, but it's certainly helpful for a coach, I will say, if you don't have to worry about constant sniping in the locker room between players. And, yeah, that's kind of absent here. So you have to give a lot of people credit for that. It starts with Doug, but you also have to give that veteran leadership group a ton of credit for keeping everybody on the same page.
John, Josh Adams was back at practice today. Talk about what you saw from him, and then also the hockey-described injury of Ajayi being lower body and quote-unquote rest. What does that mean? Is that something or nothing or somewhere in between?
Well, we got to see practice for 5 minutes, so I got to see Josh in his uniform and catch the ball. But he did practice fully, talked to him in the locker room afterwards. So he expects to play Thursday, which is a little bit of a surprise. So instead of 2 running backs, you'll have 3 with Wendell Smallwood and Matt Jones and Josh Adams. Ajayi, it's part of the thing. The same thing happened in Miami. I've talked about it a lot. It's going to happen. He's got a degenerative knee condition. It's more of a load management thing. And I think you're going to see that throughout the season. That's part of the deal with Ajayi. You're going to have to give him a day or 2 off every now and again because he's got bad knees.
How important is it for Nick Foles in that first unit, John, to come out Thursday and put a couple scoring drives on the board? And Doug Peterson came out and said today he wants to see some points out of the first unit. He acknowledged Nick Foles' first performance, saying, quote unquote, those aren't Nick Foles type of throws. So what type of throws are you expecting to see from him? And is it really important just for overall confidence in that locker room that first unit clicks even a little bit on Thursday night?
Well, you'd like to see it, but to be honest, no. I don't think it's that important. I mean, they want to play well. They want to score. But I think at the end of the day, you'll realize that Alshon's not out there. Nelson Aguilar is probably not going to play. You mentioned Ajayi. He's not going to play. Jason's not going to play. Darren Sproles. All these people aren't going to play. So when Nick Foles uses the term a beautiful dance to describe offensive football when it's working well, it's difficult to perform the beautiful dance when you have a different dance partner every week. So it's preseason. It's a game in Cleveland. I think the Browns are probably going to be slightly more psyched up for this. So I wouldn't be surprised if it got a little bit ugly at times again. And I wouldn't be concerned one iota, to be honest.
You know, he was asked today about no Alshon, no Aguilar, Mack Hollins. Apparently there's a report that he had surgery this offseason. And the quarterback hasn't played at all. How realistic is it to think that those three guys, Aguilar and Jeffrey and Wentz, are all just going to jump in on the opening night and be able to find some sort of cohesion?
Well, it is going to be difficult, and it is going to take a while. Remember, you are going to expect them, certainly Nelson, but I expect the other two as well. They're also going to be practicing. Carson already working in team drills all week. Ultimately, when he gets cleared for contact, even that will ramp up more. And I expect Alshon to get at least a full week before week one. So you do have the practice aspect. And a lot of times practice is more important than these preseason games because you can go through situations and do exactly what you want and work on exactly what you want to work on. Whereas in a game, you're sort of at the mercy of how it unfolds. And if you want to work on red zone work and you're not in the red zone, well, you're SOL. And if you want to work on hurry up offense and you never get that opportunity, you're not really accomplishing much. So a lot of times practice can be much more important than a preseason game.
Yeah, and he mentioned today he was asked about the fact that the first-team offense has not done much in the preseason and that he's missed a lot of key pieces. He says, does it matter that you haven't seen much from them? And, hey, you just mentioned a lot of these guys, I guess, that last week or the week before. But keep in mind, I would say it's not a short week, but they are playing on Thursday, so it's a little different than normal to get them back out there. But that's including guys like Jason Peters. You just talked about all these injuries to the receivers. The running backs have a lot of injuries. So it seems that they're going to need to have a pretty perfect storm happen to get to. But my question is, how many teams are going through this same type of situation where they're also holding guys back?
Oh, a ton of teams. It happens all over the league, and I think not just this area, but I think every area in the country does it. They look at their team very myopically and think they're the only one going through it, whereas there's so many teams that do the exact same thing, and they sit guys out, and whether they have something that's not serious or they're coming off surgery. And there's, as I said, if you're 100% healthy, you should practice and you should play. And I think that's where Todd Haley and Hugh Jackson got into it. But if there's any tweak whatsoever, you got to be cautious about it. And the starters who are healthy are going to play a full half in Cleveland and maybe into the third quarter. So I think, the Eagles have it down. I think they understand what to do. If you're healthy, you play. If there's any issues, they're going to hold you out.
Yep, and as we see, a lot of teams are being cautious in the preseason. John McMullen is with us. What about Brandon Graham? He's probably not going to play. Well, he's not going to play Thursday, right? So he's another one that his first action will be on that first Thursday, right?
Yeah, he's not going to play. Just returned to practice this week, limited. And, I mean, anytime you talk about it, it's almost banging your head against the wall at this point, whether it's Carson, Brandon Graham, Alshon. It's always week one. And then it came morphing into guys who don't have serious injuries, like Nelson Aguilar. He's not seriously hurt, but Doug said week one,
right?
Because he's now a very, very important part of this team. So that's and I mentioned before Sproles and Peters, who are completely cleared, completely ready to go. But they're veteran players up in age. He's just not going to risk it.
And that's crazy. A guy like Aguilar, who was fighting essentially to make the team a year ago, has now become to a point where he doesn't have to practice because he's become so important.
Yeah, I mean, he deserves a lot of credit. He's worked very hard. And I think that Jordan Matthews trade, where I threw butterfly effect at Doug Peterson and he laughed, but that did so much for this team in so many different ways. Not only did you add the talent of Ronald Darby to this team, but you also opened up the slot position on offense for Aguilar, and you opened the slot position on defense for Patrick Robinson. It's weird how many things came out of that one trade and how important it was for the Eagles.
John, switching over to the defensive side of the ball, there's a couple position battles that are still playing out. I'm going to start with the weak side linebacker at the will spot. Corey Nelson, we haven't talked a whole lot about. What's going to play out at that spot there?
Well, I think it's between Nate, Gerry, and Camus right now.
Yeah.
I think Corey's kind of morphed over to the strong side, and that is a little bit of a surprise from where we started, because I think that was the mentality that he would take Mychal Kendricks' role as sort of that third linebacker, but it hasn't shaken out like that. Part of it is, I think, Tim Schwartz values pass coverage, as he should, in today's game. And Nate Gerry's a former safety in college, and Camus a former rover in college, so they have a lot of natural coverage ability. And if they can hold up in the run game, at least competency, I think that's what he's looking for. So I think Nate's going to be the starter. I think it's almost a fait accompli now, and we'll see how he holds up.
Going to the defensive line, John, is Ngata going to be the guy that's starting next to Cox on opening night against Atlanta?
Yeah, I don't know. The defensive line, we always talk about, I mean, the positions themselves and the numbers we know. But we don't know how Jim Schwartz is going to divvy up the snaps. And because it's a great problem to have, and I asked him that yesterday, and he kind of laughed. And the one thing you'll never hear a defensive coach complain about is having too many pass rushes, too many cornerbacks. He's got so much talent on the defensive line. It's just a matter of how he wants to use it. And now that Brandon Graham's back in the mix, you can look, especially when you look at, to me, it makes sense to play Haloti Ngata as a two-down player and start him next to Fletcher Cox. Mm-hmm. And then as you go in your nickel defense, then you have to rotate either Graham or Bennett inside, and the other's got to play outside. And that means Chris Long or Derek Barnett's not going to be on the field in obvious passing situations. Again, that's a great problem to have, but you could see down the line that some guys might say, I'm a little disappointed I'm not playing as much as I thought I would. And that's one of the reasons, if you go back to the offseason, that Chris Long was thinking about retiring, because he saw the Eagles got Michael Bennett, and he was saying, where do I fit into this? And the answer is to be determined.
Right. Now going to the nickel corner spot, John, we've been talking a lot about it all summer long, but the Eagles have been giving Maddox a lot of time with the first team. Is this still Jones's job here, or how is this shaping out?
Well, yesterday, we only get to look at stretching and individual drills, but yesterday Corey Unlin was going through some individual drills, and he was doing combination coverage, and he started out with Sidney Jones in the nickel. So that leads me to believe he's back on top, and that was sort of last week was just the rotation that Jim Schwartz has talked about, but the bodies, and you can add Devontae Ballsby to the mix. I've said it a lot. I look at Atlanta, I look at September 6th, and I see Julio Jones, I see Mohamed Sanu. Now they have Calvin Ridley, their first-round pick. At least early, I keep saying it, do not be surprised if Malcolm Jenkins is the slot cornerback on opening night with Corey Graham rotating in, rather than one of the younger guys. I don't think it's going to be that way all year, but I think with that particular matchup, that's pretty tough for a young player that's never played the position, and that defines every single one of them. Jones, Maddox, Ballsby, never played the position, and they're all learning it in their first training camp.
Yeah, do you see a scenario? I mean, a couple of years ago, I guess it was 10 years ago or so now, when they had Asamoah, Rogers Cromartie, Asante Samuel, and people said, how the heck are you going to throw the ball against this group? I mean, these guys are all very good. They didn't work.
People don't factor in fit. They don't factor in fit. It's not, and that's what I've been saying. You know, Mike, I've been saying all off season. People say, well, Sidney Jones has got so much talent. He's better than Patrick Robinson. Not at nickelback, he isn't. And the one thing I can guarantee you, the Eagles, no matter how they end up, They are not going to have a nickelback that plays as well as Patrick Robinson did last year. They are not. He was the best slot cornerback in football, number one. And it's not going to happen with this group. I don't care, and I would be the first one to tell you, Sidney Jones is more talented, no question about it. Doesn't know how to play the position. And we've talked. You can read on 973ESPN.com. I've talked to Jim Schwartz about it. I've talked to Malcolm about it. I've talked to Patrick about it in the past. How difficult it is to play that position, to learn the run fits. It's almost like you're a glorified weak side linebacker. And then the communication aspect, all on top of the physical skills you need to have. It's a position that usually veteran guys who understand how to play the game excel at, and young guys will struggle at.
Would you say that it's a little bit because there's more physicality going on in that slot?
Well, that's part of it. I mean, you have to realize, even Asante, who looks like a slot cornerback, he played outside at Pitt. Sidney played outside at Washington. Devontae played outside at Pittsburgh State in college. All these guys are so athletic, so talented. That's where you put those guys. That's where you put the lockdown corners, and that's what they were at the college level. Mm-hmm. You don't put them in the slot because there is a lot of trash. There is a lot of run support. There is a lot of crossing routes where you have to sort of hand people off to the safety and understand zone concepts and things like that. It's more of a cerebral position rather than a talent position.
All right, Johnny Mack's got all the NFL and Eagles coverage at 97.3ESPN.com, including Jim Schwartz on dealing with the new helmet rule. And some interesting comments around the league. In fact, John, I'll get your take on it real quick. One of the coaches in the NFL said this is going to cost people jobs, this new rule.
Yeah, I put that in the piece. That was Mike Zimmer. He said that. Kyle Shanahan now is ripping the rules, said something's got to be done. They're going to have a conference call Wednesday.
You think something will change?
I think it's got to. I mean, everybody hates it. The players hate it. The fans hate it. Now you have the coaches. The coaches had generally been on board because they were told to get on board. And now even them, after watching 2 games of this, they're saying, okay, this is out of control. So I do think you're going to see something. I don't know what. But again, I think it just exemplifies this league is always chasing its tail. We're at week 3 in the preseason. You can't be making these tweaks. How do you not forecast that this was a disaster waiting to happen?
Yeah.
Putting more on the plate as far as judgment calls go to these poor officials. And that's what people blame the officials. It's not their fault. It's the league's fault for making the rule and telling them to do it. And I think I think people have to understand that. And that's what Jim Schwartz kind of explained. And for people who forget, the year before he left, the year after he left Buffalo, before he got here, he spent the year in the league office where he sort of, his job was to work with the officiating department and give them a coach's viewpoint and try to get that relationship better. So he understands better than most how the league and the officiating department, how they do things. And even he doesn't know how to teach this rule. It's impossible.
All right. For more, go to 973ESPN.com. Follow John on Twitter at JF McMullen. Take care, pal.
Thank you, guys.